Hello students, welcome to the NPTEL course Contemporary Architecture and Design. In the previous class we started discussing, discussed about the monolithic style of architecture. So this monolithic style comes after internationalist movement. So internationalist movement, we have seen architects and designers were discussing about the purity of the form, and then the form was more rectilinear, and then it was lightweight and it was driven from the machine aesthetics, and we have seen the pure material was shown, and mostly with the new materials like steel, glass and concrete was shown. And apart from the colors of the material, there was black, white and the gray color, which is the achromatic color palette was used. And in the internationalist style, we have seen that there was a decontextualization, and the form, overall form was not so heavy, and it was like a light form, and the form was more of a rectilinear thing. And when we moved from that to the next phase, which was monolithic, their form was started becoming the protagonist of the architecture. We have seen some examples, and there were different based on different forms. It was divided into different clusters, like it can be cuboid, it can be twin, which can be two different cuboids or two different cylinders. It can be circular, and it can be also like modular, like grape bunch, and it can also go into different kind of rhythm, or it can augment in that rhythm which was in metastasis. Now in the next phase we will see that this is today we will discuss the third phase. The total second phase was the combination of internationalism and monolithic, and now we are moving towards the third phase of modernity, and we will see from this time onwards there are a lot of continuity to the postmodern, which we will discuss later. So high modern started going towards the transition. This is the transition phase of postmodern and modern. So here we will again see the form is given more importance, and we will see a deviation from the internationalist style, where in the internationalist style it was rectilinearity was predominantly there, and apart from that there was pure form like circles and cylinders were there in the monolithic style. But here in this phase today we will discuss the tensile and shell structures, as well as the different other different buildings which was not really into the tensile and shell structure, but where the form was really important. Now if we look at the timeline, again we will discuss, we'll try to put this phase into the timeline. So here we have discussed till the internationalist style, and from the internationalist we started discussing, we discussed monolithic style, where form was again coming into the emphasis. And then from there there was this movement, which was tensile and shell was the majority of this movement, where form and function together was taken into consideration, and the form was really very important in this movement. So in this late modern or modern movement, which is the last phase of modernism, and also along with that there was brutalist and metabolist, which we will discuss in the later stages. In this movement form was really important. So if we look at the building, internationalist building, it was definitely form was important, but form has a very simplistic approach, and it was minimal. And from there we have moved into the monolithic style, where the form was seen as a container, and the functions were fitted into that container. And from there we will today discuss the where form was really very important for the architects. And here this is a building by Eero Saarinen, which is this is a airport TWA airport terminus of New York. And here we can see the structural members, these columns and roofs are which is constructed as a shell structures, are becoming the form of the building. So structure is appearing as a form of the building, and this is actually in contrast with the internationalist movement. So from internationalism, this Villa Savoy and Mies van der Rohe's works and Le Corbusier's work, we have seen how monolithic have translated and given importance to the given more importance to the form, and form was more iconic and easily perceivable. So there was more geometrically defined forms in these designs. And from there we can see these designs by Eero Saarinen and other shell and tensile structures design. Form was becoming more dynamic. So here we are seeing more geometric forms, and here we are seeing more dynamic forms, and more curvilinearity was added into the form. So here when we are making Saarinen is making the shell structure, or the other tensile structure. This is Sydney Mayer Music Ball, and this is a tensile structure. This is a shell structure, and this is a tensile structure. Shell structure is designed by concrete, and tensile structure is designed by the tensile property of steel was is used in this tensile structure. So where in both the examples we are seeing that the structural elements are becoming as an aesthetic element, and with the technological advancement, earlier it was like roof and flat roofs and slabs were there, but with the structural advancement there was shell structures, and more curvilinear forms were discovered, and they were performing better as a structure, and as well as the tensile structure as steel is used, so they can take more span as a steel as a new material was used during that time. So so we can see as a form these are more dynamic because different kind of curves were appearing because of this shell and tensile structures. Now, if we look at the architectural features, so after internationalism, form started becoming more and more important, which we have seen in the monolithic style. And from the monolithic style, and in the monolithic style, they were mostly confined into the more geometric forms like semicircles, hemispheres, cylinders, and cuboids. But later, in this phase, in this third phase, there were more curvilinearity added into the modern minimalist approach. So here we can see the moderns, high moderns, minimalist, especially the internationalist styles minimalist approach was changed and diluted, and more curvilinearity was started coming into the architecture. So here the architects like Frei Otto and Eero Saarinen, they added fluidity and dynamism in this architectural style after internationalist movement. So in the third phase, form got intertwined with the function, and the simplicity of the pure form got diluted. And here it is not just not function, even the structure was important, and everything around the form was taken care of, and the form was evolved into that. So function, the movement within the space, the structure, everything generated the form, and which form was not a simplistic form like internationalist movement. It was it was curvilinear, it was more dynamic, and it was more it has more attraction value than the simplistic minimalist approach of internationalist movement. So it was more complex, and more curvilinearity started coming into the design. Architects of this phase like Eero Saarinen added fluidity and dynamism in the geometric form of the internationalist modernism. So if we look at the building, so these were the some examples of the building, and this movement did not stop in the modern movement, as we were seeing that this is the transition between modern and postmodern. So many postmodern architects started taking this inspiration from this modern architects, and they have translated this into carried forward this into the postmodern movement. Like this is a movement which this is the building which is designed by Eero Saarinen in modernist era in 1970s, but this is designed by Calatrava in Valencia, so Art and Science Park in Valencia, which was designed much later, but has a similar philosophy of taking the shell structure into as a aesthetic element and the form of the building. So there is a term called architectural movement called NeoFuturism, which evolved. So before NeoFuturism, definitely there was futurism. We'll discuss that. And in NeoFuturism, so this style of architecture of taking shell structure or tensile structure and exploring the different curvilinear and different forms, which is a complex form and more dynamic. So this style of architecture is called NeoFuturism, which looks futuristic. So if you look at this building does not look from the earth. It looks from it has an outlandish and extraterrestrial style, and also this form is never this form has a lot of attraction value, and this form was has a lot of complex elements into this. So these elements were added, and this is definitely not a minimalist form. So a lot of elements are there, a lot of curves are flowing into this form, as Calatrava's design and Eero Saarinen's design are there. So these all these curves and are creating a theme, and it has a contextual connection with the space. So this form, if we look at this form, looks like a bird which is trying to take off, or which will just about to fly or just landed, and this is a building as a airport building. So this also goes with the theme of the airport, where flight lands and flight takes off. So he compared that with the bird, and the form was given as a form of a flying bird. So it was not contextually disconnected. So there was a theme and which connects with the airport building. So as this Science and Art Museum, so there was a lot of science and new advancement of science and art was there, and Calatrava wanted this design to be futuristic. So in the NeoFuturism, this started in the late 1960s and 1970s, which is we can say which is around the late ending phase of modern, because modern started from 1920s, which is the early modern, and ended around 1980s. So it's almost around the end of this modernism, and this got continued in the postmodern style. So the pioneering architects were Eero Saarinen and Buckminster Fuller, who designed this Buckminster Fuller's house, which was again a tensile structure, and there was a mast, and this this main volume of this architecture, the space was hanging from this mast as a through the tensile members. And then later this style got carried forward in the postmodern movement by architects like Felix Candela and Santiago Calatrava. Felix Candela used a lot of hyperbolic paraboloid shapes in his design, and Santiago Calatrava uses shell structure as well as tensile structure in his design, and which also looks and which is a continuity, which was a continuation of the Eero Saarinen and Buckminster Fuller's and Fry Otto's design. So this is a transition between modern and postmodern. Some part of postmodern, postmodern is also vast, and there were different movements in postmodern style and different philosophy in the postmodern style. So some part of postmodern, some architects of postmodern style have taken this NeoFuturism forward. So before discussing NeoFuturism, of course there was a style which was futurism, which later translated into the NeoFuturism. Whenever we are using the term neo, that means the revival of that earlier movement. So there was an earlier movement which is futurism. So futurism was mainly started in Italy and Russia, and early modern phases, which is around 1920s, which is in the beginning of this modern era, and later it translated into many different other architecture and art movement, and later in neo-futurist style this got neo-futurist style got evolved from this futurist movement. And in neo-futurism, why we are discussing neo-futurism, because in neo-futurism style some part of this all structural aesthetics which is there in the shell structure and tensile structures falls under the neo-futurist movement. So neo-futurist movement is a little vast, and many other things are there, but we'll just discuss the tensile and shell structure, because we are mostly concentrating on the architecture and design. So we'll not focus on the will not discuss much about the art movements, but we'll in the futurism what happened. This is an early modern movement which depicts the new age. Again, in the neo-futurism they are depicting the new age. If you look at the Calatrava's design as well as Eero Saarinen's design, it was futuristic and it looks a structure like a structural marvel, and people will start thinking why and how this technological advancement was used. So if you look at this huge overhang which does not have a support, which is a cantilever, and then you will try to realize that how a structural capacity of a particular material was used into this design. So in the futurism also, it was the concept was that the new age or the new machine age has to be the protagonist, and the lines and forms will definitely not be confined into the straight lines. So it will be more dynamic, long dynamic fluid lines will be there. And another concept in this neo-futurist movement was motion. So if you look at this particular painting which is called Cyclist by Natalia Goncharova, who is a Russian painter. It was painted around 1913, which is quite in the similar phase of 1920s, which is in the beginning stage of the modernism. So if you look at, so this Cyclist has a lot of added lines over there, and if you look at the legs, so this is one particular human being, and there was 3 different curves were added, so that there is a motion towards this side. And if you look at the legs, there are many legs are there. So one human being will definitely have only 2 legs, but we are seeing multiple legs, at least 3, and many more shadows of other legs. So it gives a feelings of motion, so that this is not a capture of a particular time. So there is a timeline added into it, and the cyclist is moving. So this motion and dynamism is one of the key features of futurist style. In the neo-futurist style, if you look at the building, so building has a lot of dynamic element. It's not a static rectilinear box, so it has a lot of fluid lines, and whenever there is a fluid line, so it adds towards the dynamic element of the building. So if you look at this TWA terminal, it looks like the bird is about to fly. So though it is a static architecture, but it gives a sense of dynamism. So the bird will fly from this, it gives a sensation that the bird will just fly from this land, and some change in visual will happen. Now if you look at this Calatrava's design, because of this curves, and all these curves are giving a dynamic direction towards this building, and there's a sense of direction, and then this huge overhang also catches the pupil's eye, and there will be a eye movement because of this dynamic line. So the viewers will look at from a particular point, and they will follow this curve, and there will be a eye movement. So if there is a static box like structure, there will be lesser eye movement, and if there is a dynamic lines, and especially the cantilevers, they will grab eye, and then there will be a movement in the building. Now from this style there was other from this futurist style there was other styles which got evolved from futurist movement. So futurist movement ornamentation, design and architecture translated into art deco and boogie movement. We have already discussed art deco. Now art deco definitely does not have much movement, but there was high on ornamentation, and the machine generated style was there. It got blended with the craftsmanship and the floral design which came from Ars Nouveau. Now art deco also has a futurist approach, because if you look at the painting of Tamara de Limpica, and there is a machine all the surfaces look like a machine made, and if you look at the tessellation, there was a emphasis on the the color of metal, which is gold and silver and steel, on black. So this there was an approach to capture the futuristic style. Even the sculptures of Art Deco was broken into more rectilinear form. Now later, from Art Deco, there was a Guggenheim movement where there was more different colors, and also the curvilinear forms were added. So this is one example of Guggenheim movement, which is a theme building of Los Angeles International Airport by William Pereira. And this here also, if you look at, there was a lot of similarity of this kind of structure with Calatrava's and Eero Saarinen structure. So it has fluidity, it has curvilinearity, and if you look at these curves and these two parabolic structure which is crossing through each other, has a lot of fluidity and dynamism in this building. So it does not fall into internationalist movement and the approach of Bauhaus, and where the form was very cuboid and pure geometric form was there. Now in neo-futurist style, there was later this movement evolved into the neo-futurist style, which was the highest form of these movements. And in all these movements went parallelly to the modern movement. So futurism started around 1930s. So we have seen this painting Cyclist, which is painted around 1930, where movement and aesthetics was important. And all this movement, if you look at Art Deco and this Guggenheim movement, their form was very important. There was a parallel movement which was going on during this modernist movement, where Bauhaus was there, Chicago style was there, internationalist movement were there, where the form was very simplistic and function was important. So these movements in Art Deco, Guggenheim movement was a parallel movement. Art Deco was a very predominant movement, but Guggenheim movement was a very small number of architects designed this. But in internationalist after internationalist style, this new futurist style, many architects started carrying forward this particular thought process and changed the style, and have given this a different form. So in this architectural features, so here the sculptural expression driven from the functional exploration as well as the structure was very important. And many architects, including Frank Lloyd Wright and Le Corbusier, Eero Saarinen, have designed some building which falls under where the structure, function and form together creates the sculptural quality of the architecture. So we'll see one of the very famous example which falls under this function and form and structure blends together. So this is not a shell structure, not a tensile structure, but here form, function and everything creates a dynamic expression of the and architecture is taken as considered as a sculpture. So here in this example of Guggenheim Museum, New York, which is designed in 1959, which is almost 1960s, just before that. So Frank Lloyd Wright, whose most of the work was we have discussed under the organic movement, designed this masterpiece, which is the Guggenheim Museum of New York. Here this museum's form was evolved. This form has two components. One is the other functional part, where there was a restaurant, there was art souvenir shops and other auditoriums, which is cuboid and curvilinear cuboid. Even if you look at this, so this has a curve and there's another kind of curve which was added over here. But on top of that, this is the main focal point of this thing. So this acts as a spiral inverted conical frustum on top of this base. So this form is generated from the function of this museum, where if you look at the plan, then you will see that there is a central atrium. This is the view from the atrium. The top of this atrium is a skylight from where the light comes, and around this atrium this ramp started going. And if you look at, so this ramp started growing into the volume, and that gives the form of this building. And this is a very functional approach of designing museum, because whenever you are in the atrium, you see all these ramps which is spirally going up in the on the top gallery. So you take a lift and you go to the top floor, and then come down through the spiral, and you see where you are and how many galleries are there, and you get a view of all the galleries. So that functional requirement generates the form which is beautiful, and which is not just a simple cuboid and juxtaposition of few cuboids. And there are many different elements were added. So circular windows, the slit ribbon like windows were also there, and there are a lot of ornamentation in the skylight of on top of the atrium. So and even if you look at the different small elements into the inside the building, there were a lot of ornamentation is there, which is simplistic but yet not absolutely minimal like internationalist movement. So here the form and function has a the beautiful blend of balance between form and function. Now another example of within this phase is Ronchamp Cathedral by Le Corbusier, and which is again designed in the similar phase, which is 1954. So here if we look at the fluidity in the wall and the roof, so all the walls and roofs are not rectangle. So this has curves from all the directions. So it has curve in this direction, and this roof has curve in this direction as well as these directions. So everything is derived from the curved dynamic movement of this of different plates. And so Ronchamp Cathedral, and even if you look at the fenestration, is splattered around this solid wall. So and within the building also there's small slits, and then so it's like juxtaposition of different curvilinear facades and form planes are creating this building. So this is a cathedral designed by Le Corbusier, and if you look at this building is also has this brutalist approach of exposed concrete, and this also can be fallen under the brutalism. So we'll discuss brutalism later, but this also has a because of the sculptural quality and the curvilinearity, this comes under the similar phase. Now again the Eero Saarinen's many works are there. So within the this sculptural and within this phase where sculptural qualities, the form and the function and the structure was equally important, which got evolved from monolithic style, there was one of the major component was tensile and shell structure. So before that we have discussed this New York's Guggenheim Museum and Ronchamp Cathedral. Ronchamp Cathedral is a shell structure, but Guggenheim is not. But there many of the other examples falls under this form and function, which is not shell structure, but majority of the component is shell structure and tensile structure. Now tensile structure, as we were discussing, is expression saying structural aesthetics through steel. So steel is the main element, and as steel has the very good capacity of taking tensile load. So this tensile structure will generally have a steel mast which will hold, and there will be a lot of steel strings which will hold the structure, and this is how the form of this tensile structure will be created. So there can be two steel poles, and then the canopy of the tensile structure, and there can be one, and then the canopy of the tensile structure. So this is how the tensile structure also has a dynamic form because of this canopy or the fabric which is there around the tensile structure. It can be fabric, it can be some other material which gives this dynamic form, but the main structural element is this is the tensile steel members. Now in the shell structure, the structural members is the shell of the concrete shell, which is structurally very stable because the concrete shells has a particular curve which flows the load into the from the top to the bottom. So that's how the shell structures form is designed, and it's a very stable form, and lesser material of lesser concrete material is required because it's the form is optimized during from the structural calculations. So the architectural features were, it is a post-war architecture, so all this war situations like World War I and World War II already happened. So during the World War I and World War II, so most of the designs were focused on the functional quality of the architecture, because during the World War, the money was there was a crisis situation, and the most of the buildings has to perform, and the aesthetic was not as important as the functional qualities, because the most of the monies are going into the war, and because most all the countries around the world were involved in the war in the both the wars, in the First World War as well as the Second World War. Second World War was much more had much more impact on the economy, but First World War was also quite devastating. So that time the architecture was mostly concentrated on the functional qualities. Now after the war, again architecture started flourishing into the aesthetic values and aesthetic aesthetic elements. So whenever there is we are deviating from a cuboid and we are adding a lot of cantilevers, and if we look at the Calatrava's design and Eero Saarinen's design, so the cost increases. So definitely if you make a building which is like Bauhaus building, it will be much more cost effective. But the Calatrava's design and later phases, we will see in the postmodern design, a lot of aesthetic elements were added. The facade treatment, facade was treated with a lot of materials, so definitely cost will increase. So it was possible because it was post-war movements, and after the war again all the countries had started gaining the economic stability. That's why money was again there, and then in architecture a lot of added elements and aesthetic elements were added, which was not acting as a functional element. For example, if you look at this Calatrava's building, which I was showing earlier, so this element does not solve any functional purpose. So it was possible to design this because there was a it was designed in the post modern style after the war was finished. So steel as a independent tensile member was used. This is the as a material perspective, and the material was steel mass, steel ropes, fabric or glass covering on as a material of the steel. So this was for the tensile structure, and this is for the shell structure. Concrete shell was used, and it was able to support a larger span. Mainly the type of building was again different. So we have seen a change of the typology of the building in during the industrial evolution. So after the industrial evolution, a lot of different kind of buildings like railways, office buildings started evolving, started coming out in the cities and different places, and a lot of influx was there towards the city because there was an industrial evolution, and that was a need. And now after the World War, there was airport, Olympic stadiums, auditoriums, museums and community spaces started coming. So after the World War, so there was agreement between the different countries of the world that there will be peace. So they will try to maintain the peace, and through that they started making this Olympics, more and more Olympic stadiums. During the war there was Olympic was stopped in a few years, and after that more and more Olympic stadiums started coming in different countries, and all people from all over the world started coming into the different countries. So there was a more healthy communication between the different countries, and airports started coming, so that there was a communication between two different countries, and that was airport was the main point and became the gateway of countries' entry point. And then auditoriums, museums and community spaces. So these are the spaces where this is not the basic need of people, it is a desire, and when a country or a society becomes economically stable, these kind of functional building start coming into those these spaces. Now coming into the examples of the tensile and shell structure. So this is a shell structure designed by Eero Saarinen, which is around which is in 1962. This is in New York. So as we are discussing, the shell structure gives a form which suggests that there is a bird which is about to fly or just landed. And if you look at the building, so building has a lot of aesthetic quality, and within the building also, if you look at, so this is the staircase, and this staircase has lot of curvilinear curvilinear lines coming into the around this, and this facades, none of the facades are straight rectilinear facades. So all the facades within the building and outside the building all curvilinear. And also it solves the function, because if you look at the building, so this is the bird's eye view of this building, which looks like a bird, and from here this is the arrival, and the people will arrive from here. So this is the road, and car will stop and people will enter the building from here, and then all this functional things like taking boarding pass and baggage into the check-in, all this will happen here. And this form is the lounge, from where two tubes will go, and one is the arrival tube and another is the departure tube. So this two wings of this bird is actually dividing the function of this building into two different spectrum, which is one is arrival and another is departure, which is the major two different functions of an airport. So there is an arrival lounge and departure lounge are getting divided into these two wings of this bird, and from there two tubes comes out, and where there is this aero bridges and gates were there to the flight, and this there are the taxiways of airport, and the runways are there. So if you look at this building, so together it gives a very sculptural form, and which is absolutely dynamic, and all the lines are curvilinear. Now within the interior also it incorporates the sculptural quality, and all these elements which is designed as a within the architecture and as a concrete shell structure are intertwined with the interior. So there is a drop down seating which is designed within the architecture. It's not just a interior design element, so it is blended with the architecture, and so we can see from this pedestal and the drop down seating of this space. Now another example of the same architect, Eero Saarinen, in Washington Dulles Airport, which is designed in 1958. So if you look at this inverted vault, which is also a shell structure, and this columns, series of columns, and this vault and the columns on that side is creating the form, and so this columns are holding this vault, and on the other side also this column is holding on this vault, and here this glass curtain wall, again the new material was shown, the new material steel and glass for the glass curtain wall, and the concrete was shown as the element of this the texture of this building, and the structural manifestation is taking the form. Now other architects example during this phase was also they took the similar approach. So Pierre Luigi Nervi, we have already shown one example of Luigi Nervi's Olympic Stadium in Italy, so which was also, you can fit into that monolithic style. So monolithic circular style was also under this Luigi Nervi's Olympic Stadium of Italy. So and also this is a shell structure. So monolithic architecture style was just before this shell structure. So a lot of influence, and some of the examples can be fitted into the both of the styles. So Luigi Nervi's other examples was this St. Mary Cathedral, which is in 1971 in California. And here if you look at this cathedral, this gives from the top, so this gives a cross, which is a Greek cross, which is equal in both the sides. This is a Latin cross, where one vertical element will be bigger than the horizontal element, but a Greek cross has two elements will be similar. So from the plan if you look at, so this is a Greek cross, and from here if you look at this like a folded paper, and which the base is becoming more circular, and the top is becoming just to cross. And if you look at this wall, this is again a shell structure, and the concrete was exposed concrete, and on top if you look at, so this acts as a cross, as a skylight. Now, Norway's other design in this Olympic Stadium can also come within this shell structure. So we have discussed this in monolithic style as well. This is in Turin, Italy, and other sports stadiums, which is shell structure again, was explored by Pierluigi Nervi. Now, Felix Candela was another architect who used a lot of hyperbolic parabola. So this is a pavilion of cosmic ray in design in 1951. So this is a parabola, and then there's a slight curve, and which gives a sense of hyperbolic parabola into this. So this is in most of his design of Felix Candela, hyperbolic parabola is seen. So these are a few examples of Felix Candela's other works where you can see hyperbolic parabola was used in to generate the form. So this hyperbolic parabola, all these hyperbolic parabolas are shell structures. These are concrete shells. There is one hyperbolic parabola. There is a series of hyperbolic parabola intersecting each other. There is one hyperbolic parabola. This is if you take this hyperbolic parabola and then cut one section from here and only take this part, you will get this hyperbolic parabola. And then there was two different identical things of this form is creating the shape of this building. Now, another architect who have taken this new futurist form into also in the postmodern style was Santiago Calatrava. In Santiago Calatrava, this is the Art and Science Park of Valencia. These two buildings are there. This is the IMAX of Art and Science Park of Valencia. This is one of the museum building. So if you look at, so there's a lot of shell structure was used, and the dynamic forms and different curves were, and this is definitely not minimalist. Lot of elements are coming in within the structure are there, and some elements are just as an aesthetic element, and also taking the structural load, but does not have any functional direct functional thing. So this is a lot of exaggerated forms are there. So within the IMAX also, if you look at, so this vault is a shell structure, and this is the art museum, art gallery of Milwaukee, and this Quadracy Art Pavilion of Milwaukee, which is in USA. So if you look at, so there is a combination of shell structure as well as the tensile structures as there. So this steel mast is taking the tensile load, and also this is a tensile form designed out of steel. So there is a combination of shell and tensile is there, but these designs are done in much later stages, which is almost in the similar time frame of the postmodern style, postmodern era. Thank you. In the next class, we will discuss more with this examples of the tensile structure and examples of from industrial design and other architectural movements on the which focuses on the similar design principle.